Well, hey, welcome to discussion today. We're about 10 minutes late starting. It's 4:40. It's supposed to be 4:30. Chuck, I think the technical difficulties we had just getting on here mirror the difficulties we have in our country and just surrounding the whole issue of race. I mean, there's just a lot of interference going on. Agree?
Man, that's a good way to put it. It's messy, and there's a lot of challenge right now. You're right.
So here's what we're going to do. I don't know if you follow me on social media or Instagram. I posted a video this morning. I woke up, I took a look at a text and a link, and I just lost my freaking mind. Utterly lost my mind. So I put a phone in front of my face and just did some reactions and posted it on Instagram. And if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. You need to see it very, very clearly. It's a video of a white police officer with both his knees on a black man. One knee is on the back of his neck, and he's got his hands in his pocket. And when we have another officer, Asian descent looks like, with his back turned, just protecting his partner, as people are starting to notice this guy cannot talk anymore. He can't breathe anymore. This guy who's on the ground is asking to be able to breathe, and the cop just stays on him until he blacks out, and he stays on him longer. It's like 10 minutes, and he dies right before our eyes. And then we have a paramedic who comes up and checks his pulse very casually, and then just puts his carcass on a gurney like it's a deer carcass. It's mind-blowing. It's utterly mind-blowing. And this isn't the first one either. This isn't the first one. This is just the latest one, and it's the most drawn out and the most grisly that I've seen. So if you want to see my initial thoughts on that, they're more emotional than this, you can do that. You can see that. And I also wrote an article that has some more stuff on it. So, man, I hate to say, Chuck, hey, we seem to have a conversation. I'm tired of the freaking conversations.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
I'm tired of the conversations. Something needs to change. Where are you right now?
Yeah, I'm in that place. We were on another call together, and I just told you this quote from James Baldwin comes to mind, where he says, "To be black in America and be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time." And I believe it's a righteous rage to look at these situations that keep happening. And to your point, it isn't the first. And quite frankly, these are the kinds of things that have been happening, but they've been hidden because we didn't have social media. I mean, for me, the thing that is it just gets me on this one is it's broad daylight. You've got multiple people seeing this happen, and there was still this blatant disregard for human life for 10 minutes. For 10 minutes.
It felt like someone just lost their mind and had a bad split-second decision.
Right.
For 10 minutes.
That's exactly right. I mean, hey, there are bad shoots and good shoots, and we can debate all, but this one is just clearly out of bounds. And so I think, to your point, we have to talk because we have to move. We have to go beyond conversation, but we got to start by just saying, we saw it. What are we going to do with what we saw?
So let's just cover some bases here. It's really unfortunate that probably a high percentage of people who are with us right now are informed and are aware of the racial realities in our country. The ones who are the most informed and enlightened are generally the ones who are most interested. The ones who are the least informed, the least enlightened, are the ones who might not be here. But we probably have a good percentage of people, let's hope, of people here who just haven't heard some basics. So let's talk about the basics of how you, as a black guy, have it harder than I do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, the basics are, we have to recognize that there's a training that's done in Cincinnati, and hopefully it goes elsewhere. I know it does go elsewhere too. It's called Groundwater, and they talk about racism, and they specifically give this metaphor that if you and I had a lake and we walked by it and we saw one dead fish, we would say there's something that happened to that fish. If we came back 2 weeks later and every fish in that lake was dead, we would say there's something wrong with that lake. And if we came back 3 weeks later, and not only in that lake, but in every lake that was fed by the same groundwater, all the fish were dead, we would say there's something wrong with the groundwater. And that's what we have in America. We have a groundwater issue with racism that is baked into every system and structure in our country. And unfortunately, it's easy for it to remain hidden, quote unquote, hidden from those who aren't directly impacted by it negatively. So I think that's the base and foundation we have to start with. And, as I read the scriptures, for me, that starts to get to biblical language of strongholds, principalities, powers, and structures that actually keep us divided from each other and from God, and actually diminish and take dignity away from human life. And so I think that's the basics. We've got to see the same things. We got to understand, if we keep boiling this down to one bad actor, he was just a bad cop, we're missing the bigger picture. There is a broken system, and we need to come against that system.
So let's talk about the system. As we talk about the signs of brokenness, the dead fish in the water, I want to encourage those of us who are hearing right now to try not to have your instantaneous reason for why that specific statistic might be true, or why that one might be true. But we need to look at it holistically. So Chuck, let's play a little game. I'll name something, you name something, and we'll see who taps out first. And I'm sure I'll be the first one to tap out.
Well, I don't know.
All right. Twice as many Black children die in infancy than white children do.
Yeah. How about this? The mortality rate for women in pregnancy is actually worse for Black women in America than it is for many women in third world countries. More mothers die giving birth, no matter the income level.
All right, that's good. I think it's 33% of everybody who's incarcerated in our country is Black.
Yep.
When that's a high percentage, when that's not the percentage of the population. Absolutely.
Let's talk current events, COVID-19. I mean, you have some states where, even though African Americans represent 15% of the population, they're like 70% of the cases of COVID-19, and the death rates are so high. And let me add this too. This isn't just a Black-white thing. There have been instances, hundreds of instances of Asian Americans being violently assaulted. One woman had acid thrown in her face because people are looking at Asian Americans as if they caused the coronavirus, because we've been talking about where it's from, and people take that and make it personal.
Yeah. I don't have statistics to give, but I think we all know and recognize that if you're white in this country, you're more likely to have an educational system that's working in your favor.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another one. In Cincinnati, there are 2 zip codes that are literally a stone's throw away. If you have a good arm, you might be able to throw a stone from one of these zip codes to the other. The life expectancy rate is 20 years different for people in those 2 zip codes. And you're right. We could keep going on. I mean, there's so many of these.
Let's keep going. Let's keep playing this game. It's a crappy game. Let's keep playing it. Yeah. I, as a white guy with 3 white children, there's certain things I never have to teach them.
Yeah.
That you have to teach your kids. Like, I never have to teach my kids exactly how to behave and where to put their hands if a police officer ever comes up to them in the car.
That's right. Yeah. Kindergarten suspension rates. Think about that. Think about what I just said. Kindergartners getting suspended. My question is always, when I read these statistics, what do you do to get suspended in kindergarten that a 5-year-old doesn't normally do? But the suspension rates in kindergarten of kids of color versus white kids, dramatically different.
Yeah. So we could go on and on and on and on. I'm already depressed just talking about it. We're saying here, there's stuff going on regularly and consistently, which, to your word, stronghold, it's a system of being in our country. And we're just being divided here, where some of us who aren't white are perpetually and understandably angry, and those of us who are white seem to be perpetually explaining away why it doesn't look that way, why it is that way. We just explain away. And I'll just say to everybody who's watching who's white, let me ask you, would you rather be born into our country white or not white? Which would you rather be born? I mean, that's a big part of the answer.
Yeah. So, hey, part of this is a conversation too. So we've got folks I know that are with us. Put your questions in the comments section, whatever platform you're on. We want to do that. So Here's a question. So Tiffany is asking, how do we talk to our kids about this? I talked a couple weeks ago, well, not a week ago, about having a conversation with my kids about the Ahamaud Arbery shooting. And Tiffany, I think it's important that we talk to our kids about it honestly and age appropriately, right? So, I mean, I'm not telling my 6-year-old daughter the same thing that I'm telling my soon-to-be 12-year-old son, but I'm having honest conversations with them. And again, I want to make sure that my kids know I'm not telling you white people are bad. I'm telling you there's sin in the world and there are systems in the world that cause people to see you differently. It is not right and it is not fair, but it is the world that we live in. So I think in trying to have those conversations with our kids, we need to be honest with them. And we also need to make sure that we give them a sense of hope. And for me, that hope comes from who God says they are. So no matter what a system says, no matter how people treat you, the thing I want to tell my kids 10 times as much as I want to tell them about how to approach a police officer if they get pulled over is I want to tell them who they are in Jesus and who their identity is in him.
You also got to recognize with your kids, no matter the topic, you always want to be first to market.
That's it.
You want to lead the conversation. You want to tell your kids about racism before anyone else is talking about racism, before they even understand racism. You want to tell your kids about sex and how sex operates before they have any interest in sex. As a parent, you want to be first to market. Always overshare instead of undershare. All right, and Annie Long says, what can we do besides not be racist and love each other?
Yeah. Here, I want to challenge the people who are listening who are followers of Jesus. Maybe there are people who aren't. And I want to use an analogy that might be electric, but I think it's accurate. We need to consider it. The church, for certainly the last 30 years, has been very specifically and clearly pro-life in most cases. And I want to think about that as an example, because why would you be pro-life as a follower of Jesus? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. Certainly in the scripture, we see God valuing life from even before conception beyond. So we see that as a biblical principle. But what I think about is this. It was a very clear strategy in the American church to make sure that pro-life was what we preached about, but not just that we preached about it, but that we acted on it, right? We marched, we protested, we laid our lives down. We would stand and hopefully in a kind way pray for people as they were going into Planned Parenthood. There was a strategy to defund Planned Parenthood. We didn't just say, let's just get in groups and have a conversation about pro-life. And I want to submit to you that this sin of racism is going to require the same thing from the church. So I would say, as we think about the conversation, we got to think about how we begin to organize and act collectively as a church to dismantle the system that enables these kinds of things to happen. So that's what I'm feeling today, is that it's time for us to organize and quite frankly say, how do we dismantle this? How do we make it absolutely impossible for someone to think it's okay in broad daylight to literally kill a man on a camera, no matter what their badge gives them in terms of authority? So you're hearing a little bit of my heat in that, I hope, because it's like, we got to get beyond just talking about this. We got to move. We got to do stuff. So It's a good question.
And one thing to move towards, we can't just keep talking about things, but there's a high degree of people who need to talk and need to understand the stories of others.
Yes.
And so out of Crossroads, the church Chuck and I are part of, we birthed this thing called Undivided, and Chuck has really been the pioneer on it. It is the best thing that any of us have ever come across. It's been developed by a bunch of people to help people understand the story of somebody who looks different than me. So that's something we can mobilize people to. We're constantly raising money for that, trying to spread that across the country. But
we're creating a digital version of that we're going to be piloting this summer, because in a world where we can't get together physically, we're going to be moving to do that digitally starting this summer.
So you and I are doing things to push forward. But that's a good question, because we got to be doing things and not just personally not being racist.
Right. So Jenny has a question. Yep. Hi, Chuck. In your video earlier, you commented on white supremacy. Would you expound upon that? I am so glad you asked that question, Jenny. Yes. So I did. I posted a video earlier where I named a third rail word, white supremacy, because I think it's important that we start naming that. When most of us hear that word white supremacy, well, not most of us. When white people hear the word white supremacy, I think there is a default that says, that's not me. Those are the people who marched in Charlottesville with torches a couple years ago. And I want to submit to you, that's not the way we should think about white supremacy. We need to expand our view of what that means. White supremacy is basically a belief structure that says that those things that come from Eurocentric, European descent tend to be the things that are favored. Those are the things that get highlighted more. And so if you think about everything from how we define beauty to who are the leaders that we tend to praise in history, and every other area of American socialization in particular, white supremacy is a through line in it. Think about how many heroes you've never heard about because they're not white until some movie pops up and people are like, I didn't know this person was a person. I didn't know this thing. But these are real things that get excluded out of the way we tell our American stories. So when I think about white supremacy, one of the things I said on the video is this: I'm a recovering white supremacist. How could I not be? I grew up in America. Think about my history and what I read. Think about the people who were elevated. Think about when I look at TV, what I saw. I'm 44 years old. So think about, for me, what I saw on TV as model family, as the right leader, as the people who had the answers. It's only been in the last couple of years that it's easy for me as a parent to have books where the characters look like my kids and have ready access to those books. And so I think that's what I want us to start to wrestle with in America, is that white supremacy is a belief structure, and it's underneath a lot of the belief structures that we have. So you can love Jesus and you can believe in the dignity of humanity, but you can still have this bias, this implicit bias, that those things that come from European descent are actually preferable and better. And we need to start naming that, and we need to start coming against that.
Good. All right. I don't know why we only got women asking questions here, Chuck. No, man, we only got women here. How do we move forward? I'm Mexican-American, Southwest Detroit raised.
From the D.
Move forward when we are all so angry. I think this is really important to understand. I appreciate this question here. Many people in America believe this is a black-white thing. A black-white thing is what is looking to be the most violent right now and is getting the most headlines because there are the most injustices that are happening right now. But our race problem in America goes far, far, far beyond black-white, far, far, far beyond black. The program Undivided isn't just a black-white thing. It's a Korean thing. It's a Chinese thing. It's a Hispanic thing. This has been in the groundwater of our country from the very, very beginning. The original sin of America wasn't slavery. The original sin of America was wiping out all the Native Americans. 98% of all Native Americans in our country were eliminated, either A, through violence, or B, through our diseases. I was just out, Chuck, and we talked about this. I did a camping trip out west, social distance with my wife. Did I tell you what happened on the states going over there?
No.
Well, it was right when restrictions were starting to lift. And so we camped in 6 states. Where do you think from Cincinnati, we went to northern, in Colorado, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Missouri, Texas, yada, 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 yada. Where do you think the most freaked out people were around COVID-19?
Interesting. I don't know. Where were they? You went through a lot of interesting states.
I did. It was in all the areas around all the Indian reservations. They were on lockdown, man. I mean, they weren't messing around. We thought, oh, for sure we'll get out on the Indian reservation, be able to see one of the edges of the Grand Canyon or something. No. They were like, no white man disease around here.
We're not doing this again.
We've been in that movie already. Seriously,
right.
We've been in that movie already. And they're, man, my gosh, every area around, everyone's got masks on and everything because it's in their history. It's in their history that we experience. Now, did European descent folks come over and say, hey, we're going to give dysentery to everybody? No.
Right.
But it happened. It happened. We eliminated 98% of indigenous people. This is something that cuts across all ethnicities and all time periods in our country. It's, as you said, Chuck, it's a stronghold. Yes. It's a thing that's firmly rooted with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And just one other thing on that question too is I think it's really important that we lean into the spiritual practice of lamenting. You know, there's a whole book in the Bible, the book of Lamentations. And I think so many times we get angry, we get sad, and we get stuck. But lamenting is actually crying out to God. I think the thing that I struggle with, and I'm finding help in doing this lamenting thing, is because you look at the injustice and say, but I believe in a just God. I believe in a God who is good and a God who loves and cares. And so that disconnect can be there. But first of all, we need to remember this world is broken. So sin has infected and affected every person and every system in the world. So we're reminded of that. But then we also have to recognize it's healthy. And I think, as I read through the Psalms, we see this all the time. It's healthy for us to take that emotion to God. And that's what lamenting enables us to do. And what I'm finding is when I don't just try to get right to action or get right to having a word of, encouragement or clarity to say, but just let myself feel that it actually gives me energy to continue to engage in the hard work of racial justice and racial healing.
That's good.
We got a guy. With a question.
Yes, DeVron. Way to go. Way to step up, DeVron.
Come on now. Yes. Can you explain what white privilege looks like from both perspectives? So I think he means from black and white perspective. So Brian, how about you start with that one?
Yeah, I still struggle with this term. Probably I struggle with it because I'm white. I also struggle with it because as a communicator, you always want to have the words that matter. You always want to have the phrase that matters. So Chuck used today, he talked earlier about white supremacy. I'm not sure how I feel about that phrase to the situation. It could be really good, like, oh, it's catching my attention. I'm not sure. I'm just processing that through. I understand what he's saying. We're close friends. Chuck could say anything, and I'm fine with it. White privilege is another one of those, like, I'd probably rather use a different word that makes more sense to me. And I would say, I don't know if it means the same to you, Chuck, or not, but I would say it's more white advantage.
Yes.
It is an advantage to be born white in this country. It is an advantage to be white in this country. I know there's some white people who can point to a time when someone got a job because they were filling minority quotas or something like that. Yeah, we've got those laws in the system, but please, come on. Holistically, it is an advantage to be in this country and to be white. Yeah. So if that's what we're talking about, I completely, yes, that's happening right now in our country. And I don't bemoan that there's opportunities for me as a white guy. I bemoan that there aren't the same opportunities for someone who isn't white. Yeah. I bemoan that there are difficulties that other people are going to have that I'm not going to have because of their skin. That's just plain history.
Yeah. And I want to just say, I think what you just said is so important, because when you can bemoan the absence of opportunity for others, you're operating in an abundance mindset, that you don't feel that somehow you're going to lose something in this equation if there's more opportunity. And I think that's one of the places where white privilege can often trip up. I'm with you. I don't use the word white privilege. I intentionally talked about white supremacy because I do believe that's a mindset to call out by name. But I like the term white advantage as well. And it's one of the things that they talk about in this experience, the groundwater experience. It's interesting. I'm going to put this out there and we can maybe put a link to it. There's an article I'd love for everybody to read. It's called "When the Rules Are Fair, but the Game Isn't." And it's an article based on a 3-hour game of Monopoly played at North Carolina A&T University. North Carolina A&T is a historically black college and university, and a sociology professor, I think it was, created this game. And here's how it works. The people of color get to play Monopoly for 2 hours, and the white people have to stand on the side. Then white people get to play for the last hour. And there's some very interesting things that happen in this game. First of all, when white people come into the game late, they very quickly get frustrated and they don't feel like they have a shot. So they check out. They check out of the game. And you can think about how that happens socially. Here's the other thing that happens. Every now and then.
Let's stop right there. Stop right there, Chuck, because a lot of people don't know the history. Yeah. Explain how that's happened economically for us as America.
Yeah, well, here's one example. That's good. So here's one example of how that happened. So you may have heard the term redlining. where that term comes from is the GI Bill. Actually, I love asking this question. People talk about affirmative action. The first affirmative action program we had in our country was the GI Bill. After World War II, these young men had went over and fought a war in a crazy foreign place. And I think it was good that we decided when they come back, we're going to honor them and we're going to help them get economically set up because they've spent all these years serving away where they could have been in college. They could have been developing these skills. What people may not know about the GI Bill is that I think it's like over 99% of that money went to white GIs, and GIs of color were excluded intentionally because what they would do is a lot of that money went to home purchasing, and they had zip codes that were redlined. That's where the term comes from, where they weren't allowed to use the GI Bill. Well, who do you think lived in those redlined zip codes? Oftentimes it was those African-American or other GIs of color. So they were excluded from a program that was a government program that created what most American families still today have as their primary source of wealth, which is their home and home ownership. So that's how that happened in our country. So in this game, she kind of plays the same thing out. And so when we talk about white advantage, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the fact that you didn't work hard. We're not talking about the fact that you came from a silver spoon if you're a white person. But as you look at, again, the systems, the structures in our nation, what we're talking about is there have been intentional choices to exclude African Americans. I mean, one of the things that we value, certainly you and I, is entrepreneurship. There was a thriving business community in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, I mean, in the 1800s, like long time ago. And there was an intentional effort to undermine that community, burn it to the ground to basically take away the wealth that had been accumulated by African Americans. So white advantage, I think, is a better term than white privilege. It's a real thing. And I recognize that when we think about these things individually, it's easy for us to say that doesn't apply to me. That's why I want us to start thinking systemically and collectively. And again, it doesn't mean that something's going to be taken from you. I think instead it means together we can talk about how we provide opportunities for more people to access the opportunity in the pie. So next question, Leon.
All right, Johannes Berhaney. Sorry if I mispronounced that wrong. Would you guys discuss how the church and people in general can love on and encourage Black men in this time?
Yeah, I want to say one thing immediately you can do. Brian mentioned his Instagram video that he did this morning. I'd encourage every Black man in particular to watch that. And here's why. Brian, I think that your raw, honest response was so powerful. You just heard that from a mutual friend of ours who's an African-American man, just what it meant for you to be the first voice he heard on that this morning, how powerful that was. But the other thing that you do at the end that I think is so powerful is you just have it. I mean, you're doing it now. There are words that you shared of empathy and understanding that just make me, as a friend of yours who is Black, just say, you realize I'm not crazy. You realize this is painful to walk through. And that in some ways my experience is different from yours for no other reason than the color of my skin. So I think if you have access to a Black man in your life and you haven't reached out to them on this yet, don't wait till you have the perfect words. You don't have to have the perfect words. Just tell them, I see you. I see you and I hurt with you. That will go a long way. So that's one of the things that the church can be doing. And we want to do through things like this.
Yeah, and ask them, how are you feeling?
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling? I think also what we can do is we can look to expand our friendship circles and our communal circles. And as we do that, we should be asking, do I have any people in this group that doesn't look like me? I have a group I'm in right now and meets on Thursday mornings, and things were started. Oh, gosh, I don't know how long we've been meeting now, a year, something like that. And I had a normal group of people that I know, and have some of them I spent some time with, and surprise, they're all white, And then I knew another guy who I wanted to get to know more, who isn't white, so I wanted him to get. And then I thought, okay, let's get on. And I had to really think through who else do I want to invite in this group.
Yeah,
it's not called affirmative action. I don't know. It's called affirmative action. It's just called wanting to get to know people who don't have your story. And
it's called being intentional.
Yeah. And we need to be reaching out to Black men and just getting to know them. And
Absolutely.
When that happens, it's going to be a little uncomfortable because they're going to have experiences and perspectives that are different than yours. But at the core, all of us need brothers, no matter what skin tone they are.
Totally. And I saw this come in the comments. And I want to just make point of this. So Breonna Taylor, African-American woman who was killed, again, like I said, violence against Asian women. So this is not just about encouraging black men. So I just want to say, black women out there, man, it is hard. It is hard, 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 because it's almost in some ways like you got the double challenge of being black and being female. And so same thing, man, just reaching out and saying, hey, how you feeling? And encouraging people who are hurting in this time is really key.
Right. And it's again, it's all races. I interacted with an Asian guy today who talked about his experience of he's expected to be the subservient one and to not, not speak out and just kind of be a guy. And he feels that people have these stories unless you're white. You don't have these stories.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have these stories. But so those of us who are white just gotta hear and recognize they're not all making this up. They're not all crazy. They're not.
That's right.
Just your story. All right.
That's right.
Chris Hendrickson. Question for Brian. As a white guy, I've been shocked by the myriad videos of racial violence in recent years. Undivided helped me understand that the racial injustices I am waking up to are things that black folks have been living with for many generations. Brian, will you talk about your own process of waking up to that? Getting woke, I believe. Oh gosh, all of us on a racial story goes way back, right? I'm adopted, so I've always felt like an outsider because the first person who I knew, my mother and womb, I was rejected, and so I've always had a heart for the outsider, and maybe that's part of why Crossroads has grown, because when you're concerned about the outsider oftentimes finds a home in the thing that you're leading. That led me to have new kids who came into school. I always had a heart for the new kid, no matter who they were. So when Dominic came in to be new kid in 11th grade, who was an African-American guy, I just had a heart for him. We became friends. Now, he wasn't, he didn't go out of his way to tell me what his experience is like. People weren't doing that back then, right? I wish they would, but I could see that things were different for him. I mean, he wore his boxer shorts underneath his shorts that were shorter. That was the style back in 1982. What is it? And then in college, training for ministry, the guy by the name of Bub, who was the first guy I interacted with who started to have some bitterness, who had bitterness. And one day he just brought it out. And I was like, I didn't get it. Starting to get it more. And things just progress the more you interact with people. And then my time with Chuck, it's certainly been probably the biggest educational experience being with a guy I respect so much and I'm in ministry with so much, and we have a lot of things in common, a lot of things different. So I can't say a moment where I got woken up to all of the injustices in our culture, woken up to the plight of some people who are not white, woken up to the blessing of white advantage if you're white. I can't speak to I would just say it's been a gradual learning process. But I'll tell you what, when you see a video that's 10 minutes long, a white guy kneeling on a black man, a white guy, by the way, who's making up for something. He's got pencil thin arms, and he's getting off on a guy who's got muscular arms, and it's 10 minutes long. And all the cajoling and jeering and pleading of people around didn't matter because you didn't respect. It just unreal. No.
Yeah, man. I just want to say, I know we had our last question. We could talk about this, certainly longer. And I would encourage all of you who are listening. First of all, thank you for tuning in, and talk and in your sphere of influence, ask, how can we affect change? How can we do that? So Undivided is one way, what we're trying to do as a church to move in that direction, but there are other ways and things for you to do. So I know we want to finish our time with some prayer because, somebody sent me a text today and they said, I know it feels so small, but I just want you to know I'm praying for you. And I'm like, that is not small at all. The Bible actually says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, turn from their ways, God says that's when healing will come. And so I do believe there's power in our individual prayer and even more in our collective prayer for for God's kingdom to come in our country and in our world in this area of racism, for it to look more like the kingdom than like the kingdom of darkness. So, Brian, how about I'll open the time of prayer and you can close us out.
Great. Love it.
All right. Lord, I just want to thank you for everybody who is with us right now. And above all of that, God, you are with us in this broken world. You're with us. So, God, I just want to bring to you all of the range of emotions that are represented by this collective community in this moment and experience right now, because I know that you're okay with us coming to you exactly how we feel. And you are the God who comforts, and you are the God who gives hope, and you are the God who empowers your church to be salt and light in this world where it is so desperately needed. So I just pray for inspiration for leaders like Brian and myself, leaders who are engaging right now. I pray for inspiration at every level, that we would just see how to be people of light in this moment where light is desperately needed in the world.
Oh, God, we grieve and we hurt. We're angry. We're frightened. We're confused. Lord, we need your spirit to come upon us. We need your spirit to come upon our land. We need a revival. We need not just a revival, but we need a reformation.
Mm.
We need to have our relationships with one another reformed. We need to have our attitudes towards each other reformed. We need to be under your authority and loving our neighbor as ourselves. I ask that you would bring healing here. You'd bring the right conversations to the right places. And I pray for justice to roll down, as it says, as one of the Old Testament prophets say. And I thank you for Chuck and his friendship and his leadership and the calling you have in his life to help push this forward. Bring your ways to our land, Jesus. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.